Less than 24 hours ago, South African Parliament passed a legislation which was dubbed the Bella Bill, which is simply the Basic Education Laws Amendment Bill of 2022. And according to this bill, which was passed by the South African Parliament yesterday, under the Basic Education Law Amendment Bill, it proposes that a parent who fails to, let me say, admit his or her child in school is liable for a 12 months jail term. And Bella also introduces a ban on corporal punishment in all schools in South Africa. And it also proposes that parents whose children are truant should be punished. And those are just some of the citations of this South African bill. What caught my eye in this bill is the proposal to jail parents whose children are not in school. And if you read this bill, the proposals in this bill, it proposes that parents who fail to take their children to school will be jailed for 12 months. That is 1 year. Now, I praise the South African Parliament for taking that bold move in proposing a law that would ensure that all South African children attend school, start at grade R. That is a very bold move. In fact, since 1994, the end of apartheid in the country in 1994, that is a very controversial bill and proposal to restructure the South African educational system. But I have a problem, and I think I need to talk to South African parliamentarians, legislators. They must also understand that while proposing a bill criminalizing children not being in school and proposing the jailing of parents whose children are not in school, they must also understand the underlying factors that might make a child not to be in school. As a boy who started from the village, I do understand that there are several factors that might bar a student from attending school. And one of these factors, which I must say that is prevalent in South Africa, is poverty. You know, the poverty levels in South Africa and many other African countries is very high, and most children come from very poor families. These families, to some extent, they cannot afford food. They do not have access to clean water, clean drinking water, and in schools they are required to purchase uniforms and the rest, and a child cannot go to school without eating. And when they don't eat, then I don't think there will be any motivation to be in school. Now, these are some of the underlying factors that might make a child not to be in school. And in most African countries, including my country, Kenya, there is always a proposal and a justification that education is free, that primary education is free. And yet, in real sense, in practical sense, education is not free. When these students go to school, they are required to pay some additional fees. And you know, as I have said, that in South Africa and most African countries, the poverty levels are very high. And these families, these children, cannot sometimes afford food. If they cannot afford food, will they afford money to pay in schools? The answer is simply no. Now, these legislatures needed to consider these underlying factors, and they needed to design a framework for addressing these factors. They needed to design a protocol on how they will address these underlying factors before criminalizing or proposing jail terms for parents whose children are not in school. They need to inform these parents that education is free and it must be free as they say. And if education is free, they must also aim to address the poverty levels in these families. They must ensure that these children and these families have access to water, food, and the rest. And to some extent, the state can support children from very poor families, support their education, support their admission into schools. You know, I talk like this because as a teacher, I do understand the limitation of factors that might make a student not to be in school. The student or the parent might be willing to take their children to school, but they might not be able to support that kind of move. The South African Parliament, by proposing that parents whose children are not in school or whose children are truant to be jailed for 1 year, is to me a good move, and to me a move that overlooks the underlying factors that might bar a child from being in school. One of my proposals in this discussion is for the South African Parliament, for the South African government to address the poverty levels in the country. By addressing poverty levels in the country, then the government shall ensure that children from poor families have access to food, water, and other basic needs, and they would be able to be willing to be in school. If this is done, then I think that the school admission levels, school admission rates in South Africa will increase, and I believe that there will be no child in South Africa that will not be in school. The legislature still have a lot of time to modify this bill. They still have a lot of time, I believe a lot of time to modify this Bella bill. Instead of just proposing that parents whose children are not in school to be jailed for 12 months or simply 1 year, they should maybe extend the government scholarship of children from poor families. They should maybe provide employment to some of these parents from poor families. They should increase access to health care, food, water, and the rest. Simply address the poverty situation in South Africa. And if this is done, I believe that they will be able to come to a compromise and develop a practical design on how the education levels in South Africa will be improved.